South China Sea region is once again in spotlight for the last 4 months because of the Chinese action. The Chinese ships have entered into the exclusive economic zone of Vietnam, creating adverse impact on Vietnam's economic interests as well as the economic interests of other countries who have invested in the energy sector of Vietnam. This includes both India as well as Russia, and the forthcoming East Asia Summit in Bangkok on November 4 is expected to debate and deliberate on this issue in presence of the China. To discuss this issue, today we have among us Ambassador of Vietnam Pham Chau and leading Southeast Asia expert, Professor Baladas Ghoshal. If I may start with you, Ambassador. China has been claiming sovereignty over these areas based on 9-dash line, but 9-dash line actually has no historical or legal validity, So how does one handle this situation?
I believe that every member of the international community realized that this is a clear and serious violation of the international law, including the UNCLOS 1982, to which China and Vietnam and most countries in the regions are members. So we call upon all the countries to collectively raise the voice to make China understand that this is not the way a big and responsible country behave in the current situation. And the more China state its vessels in Vietnam international waters, the more counterproductive was the image of China when they try to protect a nice views and denied rising power in the region. But my point I want to put it clear here is that the standoff taking place at the EEZ of Vietnam, and it has nothing to do with the South China Sea in terms of Spratlys Islands, and it too very seriously disturbed the ongoing commercial exploration activities of Vietnamese companies in joint venture with other companies in the region. That normal exploration activities has been there for the past 17 years since its commercial exploration, and it has been there nearly 40 years.
India has joined commercial activity with Vietnam. I understand Russia is also part in this particular EEZ where the Chinese. So why do you think the Chinese wanted to do at this point of time this year?
Perhaps that questions I let to the scholars to answer for me. But I believe that this act of serious violation will not help at all to strengthen the very traditional and generally good relationship between Vietnam and China. I believe that this is the third time China has created the incident in South China Sea of the past nearly 9 years, and that has eroded tremendously the mutual trust and believed that the two leaders or the leaders of the two countries try to deepen over the past many years.
Professor, if I may ask you, why do you think, what is China's motive this year? Because particularly with China is facing serious troubles on its economic front, on domestic issues, on serious human rights violation, democracy protests. What is China's motives? Do they want to deflect attention from the domestic troubles?
I don't think it is just the domestic issue that has driven China to undertake this. I think China has some other considerations. I think the circumstance and the timing part of it. I think the world is in a flux now at the moment. In America, Trump is undergoing a lot of difficulties in terms of even a possibility of an impeachment. Americans are overstretched here and there. And I think what China wants to do is to establish its authority de facto in such a circumstance when others' interests are all destructed. Now, it is definitely encroachment, and even, I would call it even aggression. Because as Ambassador had mentioned, that it is not the question of Spratlys or paracels, it is the question of exclusive economic zone, which is underwritten by UNCLOS, that 200 miles one can have exclusive economic zone. Now China has practically crossed more than half of that area into the Vietnamese territory. So it is an aggression, and I think China is also desperate about energy resources. Now, if it can establish its authority in those areas, then it can exploit, for energy resources as well. So I think it is a calculated move on the part of China, and this has to be condemned by the international community. And more than that, I would suggest that the initiative this time should come from ASEAN itself, because I think ASEAN is facing a real crisis, to my mind. All this talk about centrality will have no meaning if it cannot really establish its own security.
You think that the China is taking advantage of the situation, of the flux in the geopolitics?
If you look at China's actions, say for the last 10 years, you will see that China, goes front and then backwards. And in the last 10 years, if you analyze China's actions, it has done all those island building and everything at a time when others' attentions were distracted to some other issues. And China finds that this is the most opportune moment when it can establish its authority de facto.
Under such circumstances, in the geopolitical flux and in indecisiveness among some countries in ASEAN, and China is taking advantage, I would say. I'll be a little bold in saying that China is taking advantage of that. Don't you think that in the larger interest of ASEAN and ASEAN community, it's a 50-year-old organization, we're all part of the same geographical region, that ASEAN should strive for a unity on the issue? Because today it's Vietnam, tomorrow it could be Malaysia, third it could be Brunei, independent of the size of these countries, So don't you think that ASEAN should strive to have a unity, to speak in one voice on this issue?
ASEAN has been clear and in one voice on that matter. The reference to South China Sea issue and the call for importance of peace, stability, freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight in South China Sea has been made in various documents in ASEAN various meetings. At the latest meeting of ASEAN foreign ministers in Bangkok, that issue has been brought up, and it also found its mentioned in the final document. And in that document, it also reflected the serious incidents that happened recently in South China Sea. It means that ASEAN has spoke out in one voice, expresses its concern. And I do agree with you that ASEAN should speak more louder, vocally, in the overall interest of the whole ASEAN association, and also in the interest of every single member of ASEAN.